Welcome to Lesson 3 of Nginx Mastery. The first time you open nginx.conf, it looks like a wall of curly braces and cryptic directives, but it's not arbitrary and it's not scary. It's a predictable tree of just 5 nested contexts: main, events, HTTP, server, and location. Once that shape is in your head, every config you'll ever meet reads top to bottom in under a minute. That's what we're building today. So here's the whole lesson in one frame. 4 ideas. First, the difference between a directive, one line, name, value, semicolon, and a context, a block wrapped in curly braces. Second, the 5 context tree itself: main, events, HTTP, server, location. Third, inheritance. Settings flow downward, and the closer context always wins. And fourth includes: your config is split across files, but it's still one logical tree. Get these 4, and nginx.conf stops being a mystery. Let's actually look at that tree. Picture Russian dolls. Main wraps everything. That's where you set the user, worker processes, the error log. Inside main sit 2 siblings: events, which controls connection handling, and HTTP, the big one. Inside HTTP, you define a server, your virtual host, listening on port 80, for example, .com. And inside server, you define location blocks, and that's where the request finally meets a response. Everything above location is just plumbing. Location is what actually serves your bytes. Now zoom in on the syntax itself. Every single line in nginx.conf is one of just 2 things. Either it's a directive, a name, a value, and a semicolon, like worker processes auto, or it's a context, a name followed by curly braces holding more directives inside. That's the entire grammar. Contexts can nest other contexts, which is how you get HTTP wrapping server wrapping location. 2 shapes, infinite combinations. So let's look at a real one. This is exactly what lands on disk after apt install nginx or dnf install nginx. Nothing custom, nothing clever. At the top, with no braces, you're in the main context: who runs the workers, how many of them, where errors go. Then events wraps connection tuning, and HTTP wraps everything web-facing: MIME types, send file, keep alive, and crucially, an include that pulls in your actual sites from conf.d. 3 contexts, maybe 10 directives. That's the whole default. Now here's the rule that ties the whole tree together. Inheritance flows downward, and the most specific block wins. Set keep alive timeout to 65 in HTTP, and every server inherits it, until one declares its own 30, and then a location inside that server drops it to 5 for just the API path. So a.example gets 65, b.example gets 30, and b/API gets 5. Read bottom up when you want the effective value. That's the whole mental model. In the real world, nobody crams everything into one nginx.conf. Instead, you split it across files, and the include directive stitches them back together at load time. Think of it exactly like include in C. It's a textual paste, not a namespace. So whether you're on RHEL dropping files into conf.d or on Debian symlinking from sites available into sites enabled, the result is still one logical config tree. Files organize you. Nginx doesn't care. Now that you've seen the structure, let's step back and ask why it's built this way. 3 principles do all the heavy lifting. First, nesting maps directly to scope. The indentation you see is the scope Nginx applies. Second, the most specific declaration wins every time, no hidden rules. And third, include stays deliberately dumb. Just a textual paste, no namespaces, no shadowing. Boring on purpose because boring is predictable. With those principles in hand, here's the cheat sheet worth keeping next to you. When you're about to add a directive and you're not sure where it goes, scan this table. Process-level concerns belong in main. Connection tuning lives in events. Anything HTTP-wide, zip, MIME types, log formats, sits in HTTP. A single virtual host goes in server, URL-specific rules in location, and named backend pools in upstream. Get the row right, and you avoid 90% of those cryptic startup errors. Now it's time to stop reading about config and start reading yours. 3 short drills. First, run sudo nginx t to dump the fully expanded config and hunt down one example of each context. Second, pick a directive like keep alive timeout and trace whether anything overrides it down the chain. Third, follow a single include line and confirm with your own eyes that Nginx really does just paste that file in place. 35 minutes total, and Lesson 4 will feel 5 times easier. Before you dive in, a quick warning about the 5 mistakes that make config feel scary. Forgetting a semicolon, Nginx will throw a cryptic error 5 lines below the actual problem, putting a directive in the wrong context, reading top-down when inheritance actually resolves bottom-up, editing without running Nginx T so you find typos under reload pressure, and treating include as a namespace. It isn't, it's just textual paste. Catch these early and every later lesson gets smoother. And that's Lesson 3. 5 context mapped, directives versus blocks understood, inheritance demystified, and include reduced to what it really is. Textual paste. You can now open any nginx.conf anywhere and read it top to bottom in under a minute. Next up, Lesson 4. We stop reading config and start writing it. Your first virtual host, your own HTML. No more default welcome page. See you there.